in 1950, when the People's Liberation Army occupied Tibet, there has been a lot of discussion in India among intellectuals and various groups that Prime Minister Nehru was misled by his own envoy in Beijing, with Sardar K.M. Panikkar, author of 2 volumes of Asia and Western Dominance, for whom Asia versus the West was more important than any intra-Asia conflict. And that, apart from the fact that Nehru also had a socialist streak in him, and he had a communist as his defense minister. So all that led to the recognition, which was not necessary. The de facto occupation was okay, but it did not have to be a de jure recognition. But what Nehru did was that he compounded his error of this recognition by keeping the Dalai Lama in India. He should have facilitated the transit of the Dalai Lama from India to a neutral country in Europe or some Buddhist country not having border with China. And because of the stay in India, Dalai Lama's mouth was shut. In fact, recently a new book has come out by Bertil Linter, a Swedish journalist, in which he said that the Chinese started preparing an attack on India in 1959 when the Dalai Lama came here. And this theory of Neville Maxwell, that it was the forward policy of Nehru which led to 62, is totally wrong. And it's probably correct. What he's saying is true. That purpose of Mao Zedong in attacking India in 62 was to shut the mouth of the Dalai Lama. That's why he quickly withdrew. But now, is it already too late? Now every time, out of pragmatism, the Dalai Lama says, we are not seeking independence. He's giving a blow to the Tibetan cause. The cause is receding further. In fact, he should be in a place where in the Sino-Indian relations are too sensitive for him to, for example, if Chinese had a government in exile from several places, my question is that whether is India the right base for the Dalai Lama, and whether he should not look for a place from where he can speak freely for the freedom of Tibet and human rights in China.
India is the right place, I think so. What India has done and the government and people has done to Tibetan people, no other country has done. That we wish more could have been done. And as I said, Tibet could be one of the core issues of India as well, like China says it is. That's what we all wish. But as a guest here, as a following Tibetan Buddhist diplomacy, again following His Holiness Dalai Lama's advice, we're always very grateful to this great country. Now, as far as the 1962 war, it's not just 1959. You can go back to 1954, the Panchshil Agreement. 1954 Panchshil Agreement was essentially a trade agreement between Tibet and British India. It all started in 1914. Similar convention on Tibet. It's not similar convention Pakistan. There's a more popular one. Similar convention on Tibet. With the similar convention, and there were other agreements. One was the McMahon line. The border was demarcated between the Tibetan Prime Minister Lungchen Shatra and Sir McMahon. Hence it's called McMahon line. So, and then the other one was the trade agreement between British India and Tibet in 1914. So it has to be renewed every 10 years. 1914, 24, 34, 44, it was renewed between Tibet and India. But in 1954, Pandit Nehru thought that it should be renewed with Beijing, and the delegation went to Beijing. After several months, they came back with Panchshil. So if you look at the body of that Panchshil, it's all about trade between Tibet and India. It's all land route and all. If only in the preamble, the 5 points were included. So Nehru claimed the Panchshil is a Sanskrit term, it's ours. And then China said, not so fast. They signed another Panchshil, Burma. Even the term Sanskrit term Panchshil has ownership of China at that time. Now, when the Panchshil was signed, I think it was Indian proposal was to last it for 25 years. China said 5 years. In the end, they agreed to 8 years, for 8 years. So 1954, Panchshil was signed. After 5 years, what happened? Tibet was occupied in 1959. After 8 years, what happened? 1962 war happened. So one can say the 62 war was planned in 1954 when the Panchshil agreement was signed. So the very foundation and the claim of peaceful coexistence was based on deception with the intent to occupy Tibet and to declare war on India.
Doklam is a landmark where we didn't blink. It holds the key for, and incidentally, why Doklam also marks 50 years of bulletless border management between India and China. In 1967, September, October, when India retaliated to the Chinese upping the ante, they lost about 400 Chinese PLA soldiers, a convoy of vehicles, and a whole lot of bunkers were leveled. I'm sure it is a message which went, which has prevented them from pulling the trigger, because we have had thousands of incursions, transgressions, all solved by dialogue. Grappling, wrestling, but eventually dialogue. Thank you.
Again, the Doklam also happened because of the occupation of Tibet. One can make that case. In the 1930s and 50s, the Chinese leaders, including Mao Zedong, have said that Tibet is the palm that they must occupy. Once the palm is occupied, they must extend to 5 fingers. That is Sikkim, Bhutan, Nepal, Ladakh, and Arunachal. So as I said, whether you transform China or China transform you, China is coming. They're coming to 5 fingers. They have already penetrated Nepal, and they want to penetrate all other 5 fingers. And Doklam is the test. It's not just pressure on Bhutan. It touches Sikkim and whole Nepali belt touching Nepal. So, they are coming up 5 fingers. And again, Professor Sondi was right. Had you stopped at the palm, 5 fingers would not be included. This palm was allowed, they're coming to 5 fingers.
But we should make a beginning sometime.
Apparently, Mr. Rinpoche was sent about 10-15 days ago to China to prepare the ground for his visit. He made some statements a few days ago, reiterating that he's not seeking independence, etc., etc. And there's also apparently a thinking that Xi Jinping might be a little more flexible after the 19th millennium. But are you getting any signals from the Chinese government? After all, we spent all our time saying how deceptive they are. So they obviously have a strategy in mind, and it's a strategy of deception. So what would be the kind of signals you are getting? What would be your calculation? Do you think that there can be any forward movement, real movement in re-establishing a dialogue? And what will be the conditions under which His Holiness could go there, and for how long, etc., etc.? Just a little clarity on this would be helpful, because it appears as if, and from the Western reports especially, that he's very keen to go back.
Tibetans are always very hopeful, So of course Chinese use deception, that's also a fact. And we lost our country because of deception only, and it's also a fact. Now, we always say this, Xi Jinping in his second term could be more liberal, more open-minded. He will have the wisdom and will to solve the issue of Tibet. But at the same time, we also say the same thing when Jiang Zemin was in second term and Hu Jintao was in second term. And now it's too early to say what would Xi Jinping do in his second term. The only unique thing about Xi Jinping is that his father, Shi Tongshun, was very close to late Panchen Lama, and he was very familiar with the issue of Tibet. If you read the obituary of late Panchen Lama written by Xi Jinping's father, and he clearly says, and Shi Tongshun, the father, was the last person to see when Panchen Lama went to Tibet, and first person to see when he came back from Tibet. And Shi Tongshun, the father, was also very liberal in his orientation, hence he was the closest ally of Hu Yabang, the most liberal leader of China. And hence, that's father. Now, whether Whether son will be like father or not is to be seen. But all the indications point out that he is opposite of his father at the moment. And on issue of Tibet also, what he will do is too early to say. Now, as far as my predecessor, Professor Samduru Muchie's visit to, Wutaishan Mountain in China, which was reported, I asked him, again, when you're in the government, there are constraints. Because we did not meet, because he was in Dharamsala, I was going to the US, and I called him, Samduru, which is in the news, what should I say? He said, I have not officially reported to you, so you don't know. So you have to brief me officially, so I don't know the details. But it's out in the paper, yes. But I think we should not read too much. I think so. It was at most a private visit. So we should not, a private visit. So I think we should not read too much, and I think too early to say. Even after all the envoys delegation went to, China, they had 9 rounds of dialogue with the Chinese counterpart. Each time they went, there was speculation and the things will happen. And then after 9 rounds, we are back to square one. In fact, there was regression as far as the Tibetan movement internationally is concerned, because we restrained ourselves in the international front because of the dialogue that was going on. So there are a lot of analysis being done. I think it's too early to say, and we can't read too much into it. That's my assumption without having the official report.
Can General Sehgal have the next question? Then after.
One second.
Yes.
Just to brief. You spoke a lot about Denmark in the beginning. When His Holiness came to Denmark in April 2011, I was Indian ambassador there. Previous visit he had been met by many Danish leaders, although they all claimed that they were meeting him privately. In 2011 visit, he told me himself, His Holiness, nobody met him in public eye. And 4 members of parliament from different political parties came and met him in his hotel suite. And they did not enter the hotel from the main doors. Yeah. They came from a side door.
Yes.
So these pressures are working all over. I have seen it myself.
Yes, I agree with you. And I told all the Nordic countries and all the various capitals, suddenly when I meet government officials, by default, I have become the expert on deception of China, you see. So I said, Chinese strategy is like this. If you have a piece of paper, and in fact there's a saying, I'm sure there are some people in this room who knows this better, the Chinese strategy is like this. If you have a piece of paper, they say, we are friends, So you keep piece of paper to yourself. All I need is if I can put a drop of my oil, that belongs to me, but paper is yours. It's a while, a good friend, all I need to do is allow him and give him the ownership of drop of oil. So you sleep overnight, next day you realize the drop of oil is spread all over your paper and he takes the whole paper because, that's the deal you have made. So similarly, Denmark said the same thing. We opposed independence Tibet. It's just one line. They thought it's not a big deal. And then whole conditions followed. And then I'm talking, this one, it's not just Denmark, Norway, Sweden, Switzerland also, And now in Australia, what is happening is that there's a buyer's remorse, Just recently, the Australian Parliament introduced a bill called Foreign Influence, how we should restrict foreign influence. Clearly it was China, and Chinese foreign minister objected to that. And then, it was so interesting that one politician resigned recently. Why? Because the head of the political party criticized some aspect of trade deal with China, and this guy comes out and have a impromptu press conference, defying his political leader and criticizing his own party. Because why Chinese business called him and told him to go in front of the media and criticize your own party, own government, because he simply criticized some aspect of trade deal. Now this politician just resigned. So there's a bias remorse going on in Australia, a lot of debate. And then you can clearly see, as I told you, how they move in. They are very strategic. In businessmen, they buy the farm, they buy the cold storage, local transportation, export, import, all done. So now they have just introduced the bill, and then they are, they are trying to rectify things. I don't know how far it will go. Hence, you need a multilateral, coordinated approach in dealing with China. If you do single-handedly, you will be crushed. For example, Canadian Prime Minister, right? The Chinese define the relationship with Canada as golden era. I mean, it's as gold and yellow as it can get. He went there, and I was there in Ottawa saying, you must put Tibet, you must put human rights. You know, I said, you are going to have free trade deal with them. Don't give free pass on human rights. He said, they are not going to mention human rights. They are not going to mention Tibet. But they will mention women's rights. He's a big fan of women empowerment, right? Half his cabinet is women. And labor rights, because he's from the Liberal Party. So he went to China, he said, what about women's rights and labor rights? And then Xi Jinping just said, we need to have a political trust, no deal. Trust us. You don't need all this. You can't have free. So Canada did not get free trade, even though he was simply asking for women's rights and labor rights. So you can clearly see conditions working. But there's bias remorse happening in Africa and all the countries. If you coordinate, approach it together, and you can make a dent. And India can lead that path.
Because I mentioned it to Carlos Report, the Sikyong and His Holiness. In 1959, when the Chinese went into Tibet, 3 countries had a locus standi to do something about it. The United States, United Kingdom, and India. For 50 years, when China moved in, became independent, whatever you call it, the United States was much stronger than China. They didn't make China budge. Then finally, due to trade, a few years ago, UK, the signatory of McMahon and all those conferences, signed away the last rights. They said sovereignty gives place to sovereignty. Today, the only country that has locus standi about Tibet is India. I think the government is playing its cards well, slowly but surely. A day will come through the party, through the government, when India declares that China, because of what he's done and what the threat is to India, military occupation of Tibet and nuclear and all that, we go back. China does not have sovereignty over Tibet. Now, it will electrify the world. Overnight, Denmark, Sweden, Australia, no. But India being the person that should be affected, when it says so, it's sort of a mini atom bomb it will be throwing in the world. Keep it in mind, we've got to time it. Time is not yet, but time is on our side. Chinese are overplaying. When I met His Holiness through Carlos Tripa in 1999, June, I still remember, he gave me an audience. I told him, Your Holiness, I gave a 2-hour talk in the Kashak. Reverend Samdong Rinpoche will tell you what it was about. I just want to tell you one thing. China was conquered from the east. The reconquest of China can only take place from the east. And that is where India comes in and Buddhism comes in. Please keep it in mind, because this is one trump card we have, the Chinese can never ignore.
Megastar should be the Prime Minister.
Yes, the Ambassador Lalit Mansingh just said, China can be transformed through Buddhism.
That's why I said
Yes.
go to Lhasa.
Yes. If you go to Lhasa, it's not that easy at the moment. Yes.
I just asked a hypothetical question. Should we go there and
Now-
begin the process of Buddhism in
Sure.
China?
No,
That's
but-
the question.
I think, maybe perhaps, Madhuriji, if we end it here. Now, I gave you all the Chinese influence and penetration and the impact it's having around the world. But there are some countries who are standing up. For example, Botswana. They said, we want to invite His Holiness Dalai Lama to Botswana. And Chinese government put lots of pressure on him. And finally, he said, Botswana is not a colony of China. I will do what I want to do. And His Holiness Dalai Lama is coming. So, now India included all the countries, Western countries, the big power has to follow the footsteps of Botswana and take a moral stand and be courageous. So there are countries who are standing up. So I think it's only a matter of time. Like Australia is having biased remorse, some other countries have biased, it will reverse. So coincidentally, even though there's a lot of restrictions, but there's also more interest on the issue of Tibet. So that's why I get platform. For example, when I spoke at the National Press Club of Canberra, in Australia, it was taped on TV, and it was shown hour long, half an hour presentation, half an hour Q&A. It was shown twice, whole hour long, in national ABC television. So suddenly there's, and then I went to Mexico. First time when I went there, I could not fathom, I could not figure out how to connect Mexico to Tibet. How can I make Tibet issue relevant? I talk about environmental issues. Then the Newsweek, the Espanol, the owner and the editor came to interview me, and they said they want to interview, and they were considering the front page of Newsweek or not. And I give good interview. But unfortunately, what happened was, same day I arrived, the president of Mexico went to Beijing, shook hands with Xi Jinping, and signed I don't know how many dollars, the $1 billion trade. And then the day after I left, Mexico had the biggest earthquake of the century. Now you can't compete with Mexico president going to Beijing and the biggest earthquake of the century. In the end, what did Espanol Newsweek did? They went with my photograph as the front page. So to all the Spanish countries. So there are people, they are learning, they are interested about China, and they suddenly realize that unless you know the story of Tibet, the Tibetan narrative, the good, bad, and ugly side of it, you don't understand China. And hence there are platforms. So I just came from the DC and New York, and then I keep traveling. So suddenly you see there's a growing space where people are curious about China, and people want to do something about China. So hence, if we put our mind together and have a clear strategy, multilateral coordinated strategy, you can impact. And I do feel that China is they have proven that they're very good in trade. Their economy has grown exponentially in the last 2-3 decades. Now, One Belt, One Road essentially is to capture the raw materials of Eurasian countries and manufacture goods and sell it to the European market. That's their goal. So they are already investing, and they are already quite successful in advanced economy, right? Like the high-speed train, nuclear power plant, electric car, artificial intelligence. This is where they're investing. So they have a grand strategy and a grand plan, and they are implementing it with the One Belt, One Road. That's what they're trying to do. But I think the weakest link of China is also their foreign diplomacy. They use deception, they use sunju, but they don't have the finesse and the sophistication of what diplomacy should be. That's the weakest weakness, and they are coming. And one could take advantage and turn it around and transform China for the better of China. We are not talking of destruction of China or what do you call it, the disappearance or anything of China. We are talking about Buddhist-based democratic China. And what happens if Buddhist-based democratic China, like Tibetan Buddhist scriptures, we always start with Om Gyagara Ketu. If there's any Buddhist scripture, it starts with Om, homage to India. That's how we start. And the relationship between all the Buddhist countries and India will be based on that line. So India has marginal presence of Buddhists, but all the 14 Buddhist countries and 52 countries with Buddhist presence always look at India as the center of the Buddhist world. And they always start every scripture with paying homage to India and this great country.
On behalf of panelists on this class, we thank Sang Sangye for delivering the third Emil Sondi Memorial Lecture. Ram Madhavji is not here, but let me thank him also. Lalit Singh, who always is a source of guidance to us. And please join us for